be a decision maker. I don't think without that you can jump into a role that is a lot of responsibility, that is a lot of decision making. But a lot of people do that, but they still end up, learning things the hard way. So there's no shortcuts to not working. It's just how you work and what responsibilities you take to do that work. But yes, to answer your question, and again, it was always the goal, but there was no time frame.
Correct. So talking, of course, now about the side of you being an entrepreneur, of course, a business owner, what skills would you say that you look forward in a candidate? For example, like somebody who wants to work with you, like what is the things that you look specifically for them, like in your company?
So there's three parts to this. I think first is, of course, software skill, right? Today, no office is independent of software. There was a time when you had to be an artist, you had to be very good with how you drew things. But today that has sort of transformed. I wouldn't say that drawing is something that you don't need. Hand drawing and putting your thought onto paper is still something that's very important, especially in our profession. But primarily, yes, you need skills on the software that are being applied. And apart from those particular software, the particularly popular software out there, I think there is with us, with our firm, I think there is always a lot of exploration happening. So we keep trying our hands out at whatever is new in the market. We look at how it can be applied, what it does for us, whether it makes our work more efficient. That so we look for a certain initiative, we look for a certain inquisitiveness in the candidates of how forthcoming they are with wanting to learn these new things, because a lot of times there's a lot of inertia. People come in with a certain set of skills, they have mastery over certain software and they want to stick to that. For us in our firm, that limits their contribution and their capacity. But if there's somebody who wants to try their hands at new things, then that's an advantage when we look at candidates. The second thing is architecturally, you have to be able to visualize, because no matter what you do, if you can't visualize a building, how it comes together, what are the implications of whatever you're doing, even if you're working in 2D, whatever lines you draw, you have to understand what implications of those are. Right? It's not just a line, it's representing something in a real environment. So you have to be able to visualize what that is going to do, what dominoes are going to fall. And then maybe if not take decisions, but then just highlight or just go out and discuss what problems it might create, what issues it might create, what issues it might resolve. So that basic architectural understanding of how things come together, how work is executed, because in education, I think that's something that education is derived of, at least in our part of the world, is where you learn things on paper, you learn things in an isolated environment, and you don't see the actual implementation and application of whatever you're doing in the real world. So you don't understand how your intangible input becomes tangible. So that's an important thing, that you have to be able to visualize how this is actually going to come together. Because for you, it's a drawing, but for somebody else, that line might mean a wall. How they're going to construct a wall is very different from how you're going to draw it or how you're going to model it in a software. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, this is something that I personally feel is most underrated, is communication. Right? You have to be a good verbal and a written communicator, right? Especially for us with our firm, because it's a small firm, it's not a very large firm. We don't have a lot of people who are bereft of client-facing roles. It's very important that everybody who's on a project is able to communicate effectively, is able to communicate with a certain discipline, internally and externally. So people who are able to communicate with the above two skills, software and visualization and understanding, people who are able to communicate grow faster. So we tend to rely on them a lot more.
Which also ties to what we were saying about like having that clear outlook on the potential path that you might have, right? And also like going beyond we get taught in school. I think that's what you mentioned about communication, something very important because, like we were saying, these skills don't really get taught a lot in school. It's more like about like how to draw, how like like costing stuff like that. But things like business, communication, interpersonal skills, networking, stuff like that, which is crucial for any professional, doesn't get taught, ironically. So I think that's a very important thing that you mentioned there, which also ties to the next question about how do you find balance, in like being an architect, but also managing a business? Like, how do you find balance between, let's say, creativity and also like the process heavy stuff of businesses? Like, do you think that being a business owner requires skills beyond what we get taught in school, like you were saying? And how do you find balance with these two sides of your practice as an architect?
Well, definitely having a business is completely different from being an architect, right? I know a lot of architects out there who admittedly themselves go out to the world and say that, we are good architects, but we're not good businessmen. Because running a business and having a successful business is a completely different set of skills, right? And it's something that I haven't still learned, right? I'm still picking things up as I go because I'm facing new situations every day. And those are not situations that have anything to do with architecture. They're just purely situations that have to do with how a business is run, how a business operates. And being in a balance is, all about, the first toughest thing that I had to do was let go of a certain sense of responsibility upon myself. Because if you can't delegate work, if you can't trust another person to do a job as well as you can do it, you can't run a business. Because if in a business, if you're the one doing everything, your business is not going anywhere, right? So that's the hardest part, especially for us architects, because even in education, we are doing everything ourselves, right? So that's the hardest part to let go of, that you need to have a team, rely on your team, trust your team that they can deliver, and then let them do their thing and then stand behind them, right? And you don't just find them, you have to build a team, right? A lot of times you have to dissipate your skill. You have to teach people how you would want things to be done. Because if you have the confidence that nobody else can do that job as good as you can do it, then you have to make somebody else capable to do it the way that you would do it. And that means that telling them how a job is to be done, right? And then teaching them. So that's the hardest part of balancing business with architecture, is that dissipate your skill, not to one, but to a lot many people. Eventually down the line, dissipate your skill of dissipating skill, so that you develop team leaders, right, who can then even take that job off your head. That you don't have to look at teaching everybody. You've taught someone how to teach others. This is what needs to be done. So you build a team, right? And then in doing that, I think communication again plays an important role, because if you can't communicate, you can't do anything. So therein, again, I think this is the most important part, that communication will play. If anybody is looking to get into their own venture, you can't not be a communicator and hope to succeed, because communication is not just internal, right? You have to talk to other people, you have to talk to clients. And if you can't talk, I'm sorry, clients are not going to come to you, because sorry, state of affairs, as sad as it might be, but nobody looks at only your credentials, only your work, right? If you can't build relationships, if you can't be a talker, then sorry, your business is not going anywhere. And the third thing that you have there is preparation. That's it's just you have to be prepared for the worst at all times. Every decision that you make, you have to be prepared for it. You assume that it will go well, but you have to be prepared for the situation in which it doesn't. If things go south, That is something that you always have to be prepared for. And when I say prepared, you have to have a plan for it, right? If things go south, how are you going to handle it? And that's something very important, because if every time things go south, they're surprising you, then you're always playing catch up. And if you're playing catch up, you are not coming up with good solutions, right? So you have to get yourself used to that mode where you are always calm, where you're always, not caught by surprise at every situation. You've thought of it. You might not have thought of everything, right? You can't think of the future. Of course, you can't plan for the future, but you can be prepared for things to go south. So just have that. You just always have to have that. Because we've had projects that do well, but suddenly there will come a day that, some contractor has decided to run off the site, or client suddenly runs out of funds, and then the project stops. So how do you,
or the workers don't come, right?
Anything can go happen. Your bloody government will declare something tomorrow, and your workers are, shoving off in hordes. What do you do? So those are the kind of situations. I mean, there's no one morning where you can be, okay, things are going to go well. It's just, life is tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very, very good advice to I mean, and just like you said, the reality, right? Not only when it comes to being prepared in the construction industry, because we have all been through that, like you were mentioning, the client suddenly makes a change, or like the government makes something that affects the work time, or the workers don't go, the clients, I mean, something can happen all the time. But also when it comes to, like you mentioned, communicating and being a talker, like learning to be a talker is probably one of the most important aspects of any business, right? And also any professional, because like we were saying, if we are not able to convey our skills, our credentials, and also just sell ourselves to the client, I mean, it doesn't matter if we have like 3 masters in something. If we cannot communicate, that's going to be just sitting there, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And there's also written communication, right? You can talk, but you have to be able to write good emails. Like I cannot stress how many times I've received commendations just for writing good emails in a project. Like I have people who come to me and they tell me that, we have a situation, you write this for me. My clients depend on me because I can write good, succinct emails. And written communication is something that hardly any architectural education pays attention to, at least at the lower levels.
Correct. Well, thank you so much for your responses, for your opinions on this. I think that's something very important to have a conversation on, because like we were saying, none of this get taught in school, right? Like we have to learn these skills as we go. I mean, of course, we would wish that we had like a base before going into the actual workforce, but I think this is a very important conversation to have. So thank you once again, Kinshuk. We're gonna be having some common questions at the end that I hope you can also join in to give your own perspective on this. So let's go with Preeti now, all right? Let me go with Preeti. Hi, Preeti, once again. Thank you once again for dealing with us and like the audio thing. But like, Kinshuk was mentioning, we also have to be prepared for everything, right? So
always, yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I want to know from your perspective, Preeti, about this topic of career and like, growing your own path in forging your own path here in the construction industry. In your case, as an architect who has been part of many recognized firms that work globally, not just in India or in Europe, how do you approach each career move? Like, what factors do you consider when identifying the right place and time, right? Because we know that it's not just about the place that we are applying, but also the stage of career that we are in. How do you make sure that the time and place is appropriate for you to make a career move? And are there any strategies or things that you would recommend for people that might want to make a career move in their life?
So that's a very complex question, I would say. So I have usually always considered a career move whenever I felt that I don't have the opportunity to grow anymore in a company, that it's kind of the limit of what I can do in this company, or a limit to what I can become, or I can see myself in this company. So whenever I had this feeling, I basically started looking for an alternative path. And just like in the recent years, I would say from the time onwards when I thought, okay, I want to become a computational designer, I've always looked for companies which are open to this idea of project architects utilizing computational design tools. So for me, it's like a criteria for me to apply to that company. So I would never, once I start considering a career move, I would not consider applying for a company which is very traditional or conservative in the way tools are used and in the way they look at architecture. Like for me, there are lots of companies or lots of architects, like individuals, who still take things from, I would say, the early 20th century, like 1900, as a reference, and they don't really look at current technological developments. They don't consider like technology like 3D printing or robotic construction as into account. For me, that's kind of an important factor whenever I decide to apply for a role, that I can actually identify with their ethos and with their belief, and I kind of fit into that company, so that we speak the same language and we are on one page in terms of what technology means and what architecture means and what architecture can do. It's not just like a social aspect, but also a technological aspect, which is important to me. So architects and architecture plays a big role, for example, in impacting the global warming. So we need to be aware of how technology can be implemented or can play a role in improving the situation, just as an example. So we have a big contribution to all these things. So if a company has this awareness, and if a company is also ready to grow, it's like to question their own methods and their own thinking. I think that's something which aligns with me, like, because I'm also somebody who wants to continuously grow and continuously adapt to different circumstances in the industry. So that if the company is kind of has a similar attitude, then I would say that's where we connect, the company and me. So once this role, which is or with the firm which is offering a role, kind of fulfills these criteria, which I have, I am actually happy to be part of their organization, because otherwise we won't be a good fit. And I think that's very important. In the beginning, I think, of my career, I was a bit more, I wouldn't say naive, but maybe a bit more open to exploring different trajectories, like taking up a job with a company who just public projects, like small projects, or projects where like a small kindergarten or a school. But I think after a while, I realized that in these kind of small projects, or like I would say projects with a very limited budget, you can't actually explore and you can't actually utilize all these tools, because using these tools and actually implementing them in the project is still quite expensive. So that's why also I have a few big names on my CV, because these are the companies which actually get big projects, complex projects. And in these projects, not only technology is at the forefront, but also the implementation of novel technology and tools is quite, it's a given opportunity. If it's a small and restrictive project, or if in a like a public project with a limited budget and a very strict set of circumstances, then my implementing my computational design skills will be put to a limit, and probably I would only be using some CAD software to just draw up the drawings. So that's also something I look for. So I have the opportunity to work on complex and large projects where I will be able to use these tools. So it's like a mix of different things, I would say. So the ethos, is the company able to grow? Do they want to grow? Not in terms of business, but in terms of what they do and what they think. So are they able to question themselves and go back and reconsider their approach? Will they let me grow? I mean, are they open? Do they have a very horizontal hierarchy, or is it like very traditional, very conservative? There are lots of things which play a role. And of course, whenever I feel that I can't develop any further in a certain place, I would consider a career move.
Excellent. So I want to highlight something that you said, which is like the being a match, right? Like sometimes we forget that when we're applying to a job, we're also kind of interviewing them, right? We're not just like seeing if they want to hire us, but we actually want to know if they're also a match. Like you said, if the mentality of the company is correct with you, aligned with your goals, if they're like stagnant methodologies, or they actually want to grow. So I think that's something very important that anybody who wants to make an industry change, or is just about to start working, should understand, is that when you're in the process of interviewing, you're not just being interviewed or being like offering your knowledge, but you're also interviewing them, right? You're also getting to know them. So when it comes to the process, of course, of interviewing and just setting your credentials, how have you been able to address, for example, employment gaps? Because I mean, all of us have had gaps in our resume sometimes due to maybe education or some other situation in our life. But in your case, how do you think is the best way to approach addressing employment gaps in an interview?
So for me, I do have a few gaps, but they were like productive CV gaps, I would say. So I do mention them in interviews, and I actually emphasize the benefit I had from it. Like, I don't say like, oh, I was so exhausted, I needed to lie down for like a year and do nothing. That's not how I sell the gap. I mean, that's also not what I did. But for me, it's very important that you highlight what you've achieved during this time, how you've managed to like develop yourself, or what this gap contributed to your overall career, or to how this has changed you in terms of, let's say, how you view certain things, and always try to like highlight the positive aspects of this gap. Like, for example, I took a break to study at the AA to do a master. So technically it was just a break from work, but I was actually being productive because I was gaining, like I was enrolled in the university. I was actually enriching myself in terms of skills, in terms of thinking, in terms of networking. So for me, this is not like a gap. So it's kind of, and it's also important, I really feel it's important that we do take gaps and don't get lost in the day-to-day job and just stop learning and stop growing. But after a certain time, it's always good, like a couple of years or a couple of months, to take a gap and educate yourself and look out of the box and see what's happening. I think you have to have a very strong purpose for this break, and not just like do nothing and waste time, but maybe even combine traveling, like leisure, with something useful, like learning a language or learning a new culture, finding out about new technology, doing a course, learning a language. I think there are many opportunities, and they don't always have to strictly relate to architecture, but maybe it's also that time is used for self-development and discovering new interests or new things which might be really useful for you as a person. So yeah, it's important. Like, I actually, whenever I'm interviewed, I actually proudly speak about these gaps, because I feel they really made a difference to who I am and how I work. So I think it's really, they are actually important. don't look at them as like a gap, like a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, I would say, if they're used purposefully.
Correct. Yes, I think this is a very important thing to talk about. I remember, multiple people mentioning me one time, like we were discussing something in the university I used to teach at, like they didn't know how to approach, for example, like an architect who just had their kids, right? Like a new mother. Of course, I mean, even with that, I believe there is value in the gap because you're learning new skills. This person was also working remotely. But they didn't think that was gonna be like important to mention, right? But like you said, I think that the intention that we set for this gap is what matters, and stop seeing it just like a dead time, but actually, look at it as something that we took in order to grow, right, as a professional. So that, I guess, also can be the segue to talking about the next topic, which is what we also talked with Kinshuk about the topic of the dream job, right? Like we already know that this is something that varies from person to person. Sometimes even people don't think that there's like a dream job or such. So in your case, you have been able to cover a broad spectrum of roles and different projects, with different challenges. So I want to know, like, how has this experience has shaped the perspective of what constitutes a dream job for you? And how do you ensure that the career choices that you make align with your goals and your professional and personal aspirations that you might have?
Yeah, that's also a question which is quite tricky in a way, because discovering what your dream job is can take some time. For me, I actually, right after graduating from my master, not the AA, but before, I knew I wanted to go to computational design. I want to focus on that. But getting there took quite some time. It's not like I did the course and I just started working. It took some time before I could even implement those skills or even realize what is actually the aspect which fascinates me the most about it, which is, in my case, it's combining the construction knowledge and the construction experience, the detailing experience, together with the computational design skills. And that I had to explore also and figure out what my core interest and my core dream job would be. So I actually explored a lot in the beginning, like doing like the traditional work of an architect. And by doing that, I not only gained knowledge and skills and experience, but I also identified my personal approach to what dream job is and what dream job can be. So I had quite a broad set of roles where I always I had different tasks, but what really excited me always the most was implementing technology and implementing computational design skill. It's of course, I always look for the right role which would allow me to implement or to balance between these two core interests of mine, but it's very rare. And I think when you are offered a job, let's say, where you will be working on SD or DD, and this job is not called computational designer, you can always still find opportunities to implement those skills and enrich your own day-to-day work and also the whole workflow for the project. So even if it doesn't say like this is a role for a computational designer, you might still be able to utilize those skills. And I think if you know how to utilize them and if you are confident using them, nobody can really stop you from using them. And that's how you define your own role and your own dream job and your own position, because you can combine these two things. At least that's the case for me. And I wouldn't say that, in the beginning, this is my dream job. Maybe, this is kind of the direction I want to go, but you need the experience of having gone through different offices, different roles to really, really identify what you want to do. And even if the job description doesn't exactly say what you want to hear, you can maybe still find a way of amending this job into your dream job. So there is always like a flexible way around, and there's always an opportunity to implement the skills you have. And also you have to be very vocal about it as well. Like even in interviews, even if it says a certain way that this role is for this and that, you still have, like, this is my recommendation, always be vocal about what your interests are and what you want to do and what you're best at, because people remember, and then they will also assign you a specific role within the team which matches your interests. And if you can prove that you can work well with these tools and skill set, I think it really matters how you present yourself then for the next job. Like if you know what you really want to do, what your personal dream job is.
Excellent. So let's say that for example, like in your case, the dream job, or like the best case scenario would be a work or a job where you can implement your skills, but also aligns what we have said previously about like the mindset and the methodology that the business has. So again, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a very important outlook, because I think that sometimes we idealize the topic of the dream job, right? Like this perfect like job place, or like like position. But the reality is, like you said, not always you're gonna be able to find the roles that you want, or like not specifically the way that you want them to be advertised or mentioned. So in this case, I think it's important to really just highlight what you said about like being vocal about what you want, and just really make sure that it aligns with what you want in as a professional, but also as a personal development goals, right?
Yeah.
So also when it comes to the topic of jobs and interviews and the process of getting into the markets of the job market, when it comes to facing job interviews, I know that you have had many challenges when it comes to facing job interviews, and just cracking the code on how to succeed in job interviews. So what are some takeaways or strategies that you have come to learn when facing job interviews? Like, how do you make sure to land to the correct positions? Like, do you investigate about the companies, or like, do you talk to your peers about the possible openings in companies? And what do you think has been the factor that has made you stand out against the other contestants of this specific job interview, a specific role?
Okay, so I wouldn't say there is like a to-do list or like a checkbox, or like a box with like a list of things to remember and to do. But what I would say is, you should, whenever you apply and write a reference letter, for example, it's important to be concise, and also that also applies for your CV and everything. Be concise. Don't tell like things which are not relevant for the one who's reading your letter or the one who's looking at your CV. And you should always know how to present yourself. Now, this is not just important for the initial application, but also for how your CV looks, and also how you speak about yourself, how you present yourself. It's very important that you are confident, you know how to talk about yourself in a positive way, like highlighting all the things you've achieved, or the things which are specific to you as a person. But it's also important to not sound arrogant. So there's like a fine line, like confidence is important, and be self-aware and be self-confident, and like know what you can give to the company. I think that's important, but just don't be like, there are some people who tend to be really like full of themselves and like present themselves like there's nobody like me. I think that's also, that can put people at the other end off, that you might come across as arrogant, or you might come across as full of yourself. So that's super important to keep in mind. And also be confident of the fact that you've already you've managed to get the interview. So it's already an achievement, and you should be aware of it, that this is already the first step to success. So, and I actually see whenever I do an interview, even if I don't like the company or they don't like me, I see it as a practice of how I can present myself and how I could maybe do it better next time, and how I could be more concise while presenting myself without getting into unnecessary, irrelevant details, and always trying to emphasize your positive aspects and your strengths, but without getting into this arrogancy or I think we should still stay humble, because we all are from the same profession, and I'm not better than any other candidate. I just managed to maybe catch that person's attention, or maybe I have a quality which they are looking for. So I think we still should stay humble despite being really confident and aware of our positive achievements. And of course, we should also take each interview as an opportunity to improve the way we present and the way we also talk about our work and what we want to emphasize on. That's also important in terms of the actual company I'm applying for. So I have to maybe tailor the way I present my work to each role or to each company so that it matches, if I want to be a match for them as well. It's something very conscious. So for example, if I'm applying for a role which asks me, or which is specifically looking for someone who is good with detailing, I would actually show those details, and I would also express that I'm aware of what I did and how I developed that detail. So it's always kind of matching it up with the specific role and with the specific phase I'm applying for in terms of that role. And yes, I also had a few really challenging or not so positive experiences during interviews. In that situation, maybe you feel like you're out of place, or it's not the right office, not the right role. It's not a nice feeling. It's not like a pleasant interview process, but in the end, it's maybe better to find out early than later when you're working for them that it might not be the right place for you, because it reflects, I think, in the interview already that this might be not the right choice.
Correct. So yeah, I think that also another topic would be making the research about the company. Like we were saying previously,
very important.
It's also getting to know the company that you're applying to, because in a way we're also seeing if we're a match, right? It's not and I think that this is something that happens a lot with recent graduates, that they fall into this path of desperation when it comes to finding jobs. They just really just get to anything they can. I mean, it's understandable that sometimes that's what happens, but I think that we need to understand that that's the main goal, right? Seeing if everything that we are applying to is a match with us, with our goals. And like you said, reading the office culture, reading the company to see if not only your skills, but also your personality even matches with what they have. So I think that's a very important topic that you just mentioned at the end about, just making sure that everything that you're presenting matches with the company that you're applying to, and vice versa, right? They also match with you.
Exactly, yeah. And also, yes, it's important to do your research about the company, because they might ask you, so why are you applying, or what do you think about this and that? So it is important. And if you know someone, that's even better. You can ask them about these critical things, but yeah, be aware of what you're signing up for. I think that's important.
So now let's get to talk about a more, common discussion that we often have in the construction industry, which is the topic of networking, right? So unfortunately, Kinshuk had to drop off because of some personal situations that happened, but we can just have the conversation of networking. I think the both of us have had pretty interesting experiences when it comes to this topic. So let's first talk about like, talking or recognizing that networking in our industry is sometimes tough, right? But in your case, Priti, you have carved a rewarding path for yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about like if networking has had an influence in the way that you have been able to land jobs or like advance your career? Like what has been your experience with networking and in your career growth?
Okay, so for me personally, I haven't had the chance to find a job through networking. So it's always been by me applying directly or me applying through a recruiter. But like networking for me personally, that hasn't been like a helping hand in finding a new role. But I would not disregard networking. I think it's very important. Just because it hasn't worked for me in terms of finding a job doesn't mean that it doesn't work for others. And I do see that it does work in terms of, meeting the right people who might be by chance aware of a vacancy in their company, or maybe they can introduce you to someone. It's important, and I think each of us, we have to make the effort. Nobody is going to come to you and introduce themselves. So we, as individuals, as members of this industry, we have to make the effort and find opportunities to network, such as events, like industry-related events or conferences, or even social gatherings where we might meet someone from another company or another office. So I think it's super important to also stay in touch with the development which is happening in the industry. So because we all work in a collaborative mode, and we need to also network in order to understand what's happening in the industry. And if you're not able to like attend conferences or events or social gatherings for these kind of networking opportunities, we can also try to just contact people like through LinkedIn maybe, and see whether they have time to talk to us, or they have any vacancy or opportunity. And sometimes they even respond and they are happy about being contacted. And sometimes, of course, they feel like it's annoying, but we should always try, and we should always reach out to the other people in our industry, in our network, and make ourselves seen and make ourselves heard. And and also if we meet someone through an event, just go to them and talk to them and introduce yourself. I think there's no harm in being very proactive about this.
Yeah, I think that what you mentioned about like reaching out is very important. Sometimes I think that, I mean, I think we have all heard about like what people say about architects, that we are very like ego driven, right? Or like stuff like this. But I think that when you are trying to forge a career for yourself, or like you're just getting to or getting into the job market, I think this is something that we need to challenge, right? Like this idea that nobody's there to help us, or that nobody's willing to offer an advice or even just talk to us. I think that's very important. And also, like you said, both offline and online, you can do it. You can reach out to people. In my experience, I mean, I think I have had very interesting experiences when it comes to networking, particularly in offline events, like in conferences and stuff like that. One advice that I could give to people who is watching is get involved in different events. For example, if you're still studying, it's crucial for you to get acquainted, like for the conferences or like there's like congresses that sometimes schools make. That's how you meet people. That's how you get to talk with the professionals who have a lot of years in the industry. And also, like you said, making yourself known, getting yourself out there. It's important from the get-go, like even before you graduate. And also, I want to call back to what Kinshuk said previously about like being able to build relationships with other professionals is a skill in its own that sometimes we don't talk about. So if you gather all of these things about like being able to reach out to people, making yourself known, getting out there, and just really just like you were mentioning, making sure that what you want is put out there, right? Like being vocal about what you want as well. So also when it comes to in the process of interviewing and you know, like showing yourself, like we were saying, when it comes to the portfolios, like I know you have you know, a lot of experience by landing jobs with these very important companies around the world. In this case, what do you think would be the key aspect that has been able to make you stand out as a candidate in your portfolio? Like what do you think made you stand out from the rest?
Well, that's only something they can answer, the ones who interviewed me and selected me. But like developing the right or the portfolio, the way it looks right now has taken me a long time, because there's no right and wrong in a portfolio and the way you set up your CV. But over the years, I have figured out that it's important to be very concise, because nobody has the time to read through details. So be very specific, be very concise, and also be very clear about what you want to show to anyone or to show to other people. Like be very specific about the content and be very mindful about how you present it. So also graphically, not just verbally and in the written way, graphically be very clear about the story you want to tell and about the colors, the fonts. So be very, maybe sometimes reduce the number of colors, it's kind of easy to digest to the eye. So it's not too loud, not too overloaded. I think that's very important. So visually, graphically, that's important. Being concise is very important, but also that you are able to tell a story through your CV and your portfolio. So they kind of go together. And if you have certain set of skills, it's important to express those skills. Like, for example, you're good with details, then you should show a detail which is very representative for your skill set, but don't show like 10 details. Show one good detail and be very, pick the best out of that project which you want to show. So it's not just about your CV and the letter, but also the portfolio itself. It should tell a story. And when you show a project, don't show like everything you've done, but pick the things which really are close to you in a way.
Relevant, right?
They are relevant to your skill set, but also they're relevant to the role you're applying for. And also they bring it to the point, like the range of your skills. Like I don't need to have like 10 different drawings to show that I have 10 different skills. Maybe I can combine this in a smart way and be concise about how I present my skill set. I think that's because people don't have time and they just browse through it quickly and then that's it. And also when you then explain those projects in an interview, it's similarly, we have to be very mindful about the wording and how we present it. So it's easily digested, but also it's to the point and it's concise. I think that's, for me personally, that's important. But it took me quite some time to find out that path. So I think it's a learning process.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, I think that a very important thing is, you know, being clear with the story that you are telling, right? Which is something very interesting that often people don't recognize, is that the portfolio is a story of you, basically, right? Because like you said, people don't really have the time to just go through 40 pages. It's often like just a couple of minutes at most, right? Because sometimes they just like swipe through. And it is important to have simplicity, like also taking care of the vocabulary that you're using, I think. So yeah, I think like you mentioned, just making sure that you are presenting not only the projects, but also your skills, right? Like you said, it's not necessary to have 10 projects to define 10 skills. You can easily do it in one project and just have the impact that you want. So yeah, I think that in this case, for example, like, have you made any courses, or like, how do you like or get feedback when it comes to the portfolio? Like, how do you figure out what works and what didn't work?
I think that's a learning process. And while someone like that style, another person likes another style. So there's really no right or wrong. And I think you just have to figure out what's best for you, what works best for you in order to communicate your personal story, your personal skill set. There's no real, yeah, this is how you do it. I haven't done any course. I mean, this was like a learning process for me.
Excellent. So now let's talk about a topic that is kind of like more like the big picture, let's say, right? So when it comes to, you know, being able to build and make an impact in our industry, but also in the environment, like you were mentioning at the beginning, because we already know that architecture is one of the most impactful industries in the world, not only when it comes to, you know, making a landmark or telling a story of a city, but also, unfortunately, when it comes to pollution and like contamination as well. So what do you think will be the role of technology, like, you know, and other methodologies like BIM or like parametric design, computational design, artificial intelligence? What do you think will be the impact of these technologies moving forward in our industry? Like, do you think it will be hugely impactful for us, or do you think it was going to be like a gradual change into adopting these technologies?
I think for me personally, these kind of tendency or technological developments can be quite impactful for our industry, but the industry also has to be open to accept and absorb these kind of skills. So what I've seen, the industry is very slow in absorbing these technological developments, especially the build, like the construction and architectural design industry. They are kind of very much behind in when it comes to accepting and adopting these skill sets. So I would say if the industry was a bit more open or faster in adopting these changes, it would make a very big impact in terms of how we simulate, for example, the environmental impact of a certain design, or how we collaborate, how we express an idea. We might just express an idea by numbers and not by a nice diagram. So it can make a very big difference to our industry, but it will also take some time. But I personally believe we have to stay up to date with this technological development, because, or maybe this is my personal approach, that some people think once they've finished studying, that's it. They are there with their certain skill set and they don't need to do anything anymore. But the environment and our industry is constantly developing, so we have to keep up to date with these developments. And I would also say that those who don't invest in their career in terms of learning and staying up to date with technology, they will be at the losing end at some point, because you have to stay up to date. Unless you are working for a really small project and for a really small company, maybe then you can survive with a limited skill set. But I can see that, for example, most companies are looking for people with like BIM skills, Revit skills, and it's also quite rare to see that somebody uses computational design skills, because most people think it's like playing around. They don't really see the benefit of being in control over what you're designing, or being in control of the data you are developing. So I would say that also has a lot of benefits, just it's not like super high demand. I would say BIM definitely, and it's definitely important for large scale projects, because you have to collaborate with other consultants, with other team members, and it can only be done through a BIM platform. So there's no way you could collaborate in a large team. And I think if one sticks to the skill set they've come with to the, like after school, after graduating, they will kind of fall behind, and they will also not get all these roles where they are able to express their ideas. They might just get some management tasks where you don't necessarily need to know all these tools. So for me, these technologies, they can help us in developing better designs. I mean, also like when you say computation or AI, you can start doing some simulations, or you can project what my design could be if I would implement these or that skill technology, or if I would change my attitude, what would it be? You know, it's kind of also like it gives us, it could inspire us, but it also can give us answers in terms of what it needs to be, our project. So yeah, I mean, data is very important for decision making. Like if you, for example, you do like a PV analysis, like what angle is best for my PVs, then it's actually you're comparing data, and you might like all the options visually, but then you can make an informed decision, which is not just intuitive, but it's actually data driven, and it's driven by numbers. So I think it's quite important that we embrace those technological developments and implement them into our workflows and day-to-day life, even though the industry is a bit slow.
Yeah, and also I think also would be important to make sure that we push the technology, like you said, to be faster to adopt these, because I mean, we already know that architecture and in general the construction industry is one of the slowest when it comes to adopting technologies. Only agriculture is the one that is the slowest of all. So imagine, I mean, something that may generate so much money every single day, they haven't, you know, I mean, we haven't really adopted as fast as other technologies or other sectors of the industries. So I think also that would be an important part. So just moving forward, like, do you think there's any parting words or any advice or even best practices that you could share with the audience that is watching us right now through like the live stream and also here in Zoom that are architects or graduates? Like, do you have any parting words for them?
I would say it's important to find your own path within this architecture and construction industry. Otherwise, you might lose interest very quickly. So it's kind of, you have to define your own role. That would be my message. That's something I figured out for, like, it took me a few years to figure out what I want to be, what my role should be, and yeah, stick to it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Preeti, so much for these words.
Thanks,
and your
Arat.
opinions on the different topics that we talked today. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, this is going to be the end of the career series and of course the end of our contest. So you already know that by making questions, you also gain points and you move up in the ranking. All right. So now it's opportunity for the people in the audience to make questions. The floor is yours. And I want to know if there's any questions that you guys might have for Preeti and also Kinshuk. In this case, of course, Kinshuk has already left, but we made sure to make these questions as well to him. And if there's responses for them, we're gonna make sure to canalize them as well. So let me check the chat in here. You can put your questions in the chat or you can raise your hand so you can ask the question live. So here with Arian Aurora, as a recent graduate doing his first job as a BIM architect, aspiring to switch to computational design eventually, what would you suggest are the key points that I should note and keep in mind, I guess, for like the career change? Does it make any difference as an applicant to firms if I have a background and experience in BIM? So I guess we can simplify the question as like, what would be the things that somebody should look out for, or like the key things that somebody should take in consideration when making the career change? And do you think there's any importance or any difference for somebody who has a BIM background, like switching into computational design?
I don't think they're so far apart because you, I mean, mostly people who, I think it can only be beneficial if you have knowledge in certain platforms and certain softwares, and you have a strong skill set in BIM. I don't think that can be it can only benefit you in terms of developing your skills further, because it doesn't end there with BIM or with computational design. Once you start combining these things, like using computational design skills in BIM or being able to transfer your computational model to a Revit model, I think that's where it starts becoming interesting. So I would highlight that background and would say you would want to further develop yourself and you want to reach out to different platforms and combine these skills. So I wouldn't say it always depends how you sell it, but I think the existing skill set you have can only be a benefit for you in understanding where the limitations are of each tool, but also how they can enrich each other.
Also would like to add, like from the perspective of a BIM specialist, I mean, there's a point in working with BIM that, let's say, the traditional approach of BIM doesn't suffice, right? I've seen a lot of architects working in BIM that started to learn how to code, started to learn how to work with Dynamo, with Grasshopper, all these tools that are from like the visual programming. So, I mean, I think that at one point or another, you're gonna end up having to delve into computational design. And like Preeti mentioned, this can only benefit your career growth. So, I mean, if you're seeking the change, I mean, I think you should do it. I mean, it's always interesting to change and also challenge yourselves, right? So let's go with Kushmita. Let me open up the mic for them. There we go.
Hi, Arat, Chaitanya, and Preeti. Thank you for the informational webinar. I really appreciate it. So my quick question is, how can you transition from running a traditional architecture firm into a company who is inclined using, these computational and BIM softwares, like when you're running your own firm and then you want to really, work for these larger projects. So do you think it's a better thing to quit and get into a company, or how does one do it?
Okay, for me, I have never had my own company, so it's kind of a tricky question. But if you are working by yourself, you can maybe already start learning those skills and implementing them in your own projects. I think that would be like the first step if I was running my own company, and I would want to make this transition. Then I would start learning them first, like getting educated on these skill sets, and would actually start implementing them in my own projects, in my own work, because starting to work for another company and they're hoping to be able to implement those skills is very rare, I would say. I would, if I was you, that's what I would do.
Do you think it would be interesting, what do you say? Would it be more interesting to, learn the skill sets and then maybe work collaboratively with bigger studios? So in that way, I can get my hands on to larger projects and how they actually function. Because at a smaller scale, it would be mainly, say, residences, mid-sized commercial buildings. And mainly, as I see, whenever there is a computational design project that's being used, it's so much more on the urban scale or large scale mixed land use projects. So to reach there takes a lot more time. But do you see that there is a market space for someone who would love to collaborate with, larger companies, but with the background of
I'm not sure. Like, you could try to find the right role after having learned those skills, but I would also still try to implement them in my own work. I think that's the best way you can actually express your, even if these are smaller projects, you can still implement computational design skills even in smaller projects. It just is more apparent in larger projects, I would say, because of the cost which is behind. And those skills are also not quite, I would say, not very frequent, or yeah. So, I mean, I would explore a bit. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but first step is to learn. I think the first step is
Yes.
to get acquainted with those skill sets.
Right,
Excellent.
makes
Well,
sense. Yeah,
thank you so
Preeti.
much, Kushmita, for your question, and thank you, Preeti, for answering it. Let's go with Sasha.
Hi. Hi.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So my question is, I'm working as a design intern in retail designing firm. So it's full and full retail designers they are. Interior designers, architects, and everyone are there, but they are using SketchUp. I wanted to optimize the process even more. So as a design intern, how can I, introduce not the whole process of BIM workflow there, but a part of it without disrupting the use of SketchUp? Is there any way to do that?
Yeah, that's a very specific situation you are describing. I mean, maybe you can propose that this workflow could be better if you were using, let's say, Rhino and Grasshopper as an example. But for that, you have
Well, I don't know what happened there with Preeti. But yeah, let me just continue like the response. Like I had a situation similar to what you were describing in one of my previous roles. So this was a company that had to do with like solar energy and stuff like that. So the reason or the way that I introduced in this case was Revit to the company was by making the project just on my own. I didn't really ask for permission or anything like that. I just went in there and did it. And I think that the important thing here is the results that you are able to provide, because that's what's gonna make them understand that there is potential in the new workflow that you want to introduce, right? And also making them understand that it's not gonna take any more like investment or anything like that because you already have that skill, right? So I think in this case would be focusing on the results that you can provide for them and just making sure that you sell them in a correct manner, right? So I think that could be the best way to approach this.
Yes. The thing
yeah,
is, they
I
are
think-
open to. The thing is, they are open to inculcate whatever I introduce if it is going to be more efficient
Mm.
than the current process they follow. So I don't want to disrupt the whole thing. So just go with the flow. I want to thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I think that like I said, if you are able to just try to explore it and make the challenge, challenge yourself to make it and show it how is it possible to do it in the new workflow that you want to introduce or the new software. And as long
Yeah.
as you're able to present these results correctly, I think that will be the winning point for this goal or like this new introduction. So yeah. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank
Thank
you,
you so
Sasha.
much.
sorry,
you,
my
Arad.
battery died.
All right,
Hi.
all right.
Hi, Arad. Sorry, my battery just unexpectedly just died. I didn't see. But I hope
Yeah, no
you were
worries.
able to answer the question Sasha had.
Yeah. I did like continue what you were saying. So yeah, no worries, Preeti. Thank you for joining us back. And let's just go with the last question from Rohini. So this is also kind of like a very specific scenario, but is computational design going to be beneficial for an experienced person who is from an interiors design background? Is it like starting a career from scratch?
I think it's always beneficial no matter what background you're coming from, because computational knowledge can be implemented in all kinds of fields. And if you have the technical experience or the detailing experience, materiality experience, I think that's when it really makes sense to use and utilize computational design skills. So you know what you're actually doing. It's not just playing around with geometry, but you know how construction works, how fabrication works. I think then it actually becomes quite meaningful and interesting, because that's also what I really enjoy, like combining construction knowledge, detailing knowledge with computation. So I see this kind of as a related path. Like once they come together, it gets meaningful and it gets interesting. Otherwise, it might just be a bit of playing with geometry and forms.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's the key is what you said about like the computational mindset and the computational thinking, right? Like not just the Grasshopper or Dynamo, just like the overall understanding of data is, I think, beneficial for anything really. So yeah, thank you so much, Preeti, for the response, and thank you as well, Rohini, for your question. And that's going to be pretty much it for this webinar. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this last episode. Or make sure to stay tuned to our social channels because we're going to be announcing the winners for this contest. And once again, Preeti, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks
and
for
also-
having me. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And also like for weighing on us on the situation at the beginning. And also to Kinshuk, who is watching us live, I think. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see each other on the next one. All right. See you guys.
Thank you. Bye.